The New York State Office of Addiction Services and Support, or OASAS, provides this podcast as a public service. Thoughts and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent or reflect those of the agency or state. This is Addiction, the Next Step.
You are listening to Addiction, the Next Step, brought to you by the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports. I'm your host, Jerry Gretzinger, and today on the episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about something that will certainly, I think, make a connection with a lot of people, because we're talking about a young person, a child of someone who had a substance use issue that they were dealing with that did not come to the kind of conclusion that the family had certainly hoped for. But it is also a story of using that as an opportunity to do a lot of good and to help others going forward. So we'll get into all of that right now. But first, I'm going to introduce our guest. And our guest is Kristin Smith. Thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
And Kristin, I talked about this young person, this child, and this is your child. Her name is Summer Smith.
Yes.
And
yes.
I love the piece of this story about what's happening now in her memory to help others who may find themselves in a situation similar to what hers was. But I want to start with the story about your daughter. I want people to know who she was and how we got to where we are today. So if you don't mind, take us back. Tell us about Summer.
Summer was bright. When I say bright, I mean bright like sunshine, just like her name. She was strong. She grew up being challenged. When she was a young child, she was vivacious. She was here in Guilderland. She was a student here and was doing very well in school. And when she reached about fourth grade, her demeanor changed, her behavior changed. And I started taking her to counseling. I wanted to find out what was going on. And it turns out she was being victimized. She was a victim of child sexual abuse by a very close family member. And her life changed in ways that I can't even begin to describe, as well as our families. And, you know, you think that you need to protect your children from, for example, outside of your home. You don't necessarily realize that you need to protect your child from inside your home at times.
Yeah. All right. So I know you said her demeanor changed when this started happening. So you noticed this, you spoke to her, you discovered that this was going on.
Yes, and began taking her to counseling.
Yeah. So at what point, I guess, was it before that, during that, after that, that substances became a part of, I'm assuming, how she was coping with what was going on in her life?
Yes. I didn't realize, but Summer actually began drinking at the very tender age of 9.
Oh, wow.
I did not have alcohol in my household, but apparently when she would visit other folks' homes,
Yep.
And she obviously began to like that feeling, as she explained to me. It helped to cover up some of the pain that she was feeling, even though she was going to counseling.
When did she let on to you that she had been, drinking alcohol at that early age?
I did not know that until the year before Summer passed away.
Wow.
I became aware when Summer was 14. She came to me and she said, "Mom, I've been smoking pot, and I have not been able to stop." And at that point, I took her in to talk to somebody. She began going to meetings. She began going to an outpatient group. And we thought she was doing well after that.
So you talked about the alcohol. You eventually learned that it started as early as 9 years old. At 14, she talked about using cannabis. Did she go to other substances at any point?
She did, and I was not always as aware. I became aware when she was older. I knew she was experimenting with different things. I knew that she was drinking. At that time, though, I really thought it was more of that typical behavior you might see with an adolescent who is experimenting.
Yeah.
But we continued to go to counseling as a family together, and Summer, again, individually. But she struggled so much during that period, spending some time inpatient in places, and actually even being diagnosed as well with some mental health co-occurring disorders at that time.
You mentioned something there that while you were seeing some of these behaviors she was exhibiting, you weren't sure if it was just, the typical, pattern that some teens go through in this time of life. Before we go forward, if there's parents out there that are wondering, looking at it now, are there certain things that they might want to look for to say, okay, no, that is out of the ordinary, or this is the way to know the difference between acceptable and different level of concern.
I think, everything is easier when you look back.
Right.
But I think when you're in the moment, it is very hard at that age because you do anticipate your children perhaps experimenting. The majority of us have. And I go to a conversation that my own daughter, Summer, had with her 12-year-old son. And I think she gave the best advice. And this was in the year before she passed, when she was living a life in sustained recovery before her last overdose. Well, not her last overdose, but her last relapse, which resulted in an overdose. She was talking to her son, and she said, people are going to approach you. You're going to be approached by your peers, just like all children are. They're going to want you to try things, and it's normal to be able to do this. But for some people, you just can't stop, and you don't know it's you until it's too late. So looking back at Summer's behaviors, she became, I would say that she would step back and not be as open as she would. She started to come home a lot later than she normally would. Following the rules was a challenge for her. She would hide things. But she was also very good at really keeping it under wraps. She was still going to school. She graduated from Guilderland High School. So I really didn't know the extent as to what was really going on until she was a little older, until she was about 18 years old when she was introduced to some other substances.
So I want to move on to that. So we've talked about 9 years old. We got to 14. You just referenced 18. And you also talked about how she had a son. So
Yes.
How old was she when she, as you alluded to, overdosed and passed?
Summer was 31.
31.
So she battled with substance use disorder. She fought this battle for probably about 13 to 14 years in a very noticeable way when we became very aware as a family what was going on.
And so it sounds like, you were doing all you could at the time. She was in counseling, you were trying to speak to her. And I mean, it is not an easy thing to have a child who's using substances and obviously keeping some things from the parental figures. You said at 18, she went into other substances. So we discussed alcohol, we talked about cannabis, and then it went on to what?
It first started with cocaine. Cocaine became a drug of choice for Summer. She was introduced to that by somebody, again, who she was very close to. And that's the story that she shared with her son. She said the person that introduced her to it could stop. She couldn't.
Yeah.
And then from there, it went to heroin. When Summer gave birth, she was diagnosed with endometriosis, and she was given OxyContin. And she started to take that, and then she was kind of off to the races. And then when that was not available for her any longer, it turned into heroin, is my understanding.
Yeah. And we hear so many instances that are similar to that, where they were given something as a prescription, and then it just became unsustainable, and finding other ways to get that fix, if you will. So she had a child. When did she have her first child?
She was 18 years old when she had her first child. And I always say she was an amazing mom. When Summer was not having a difficult time, she loved her son so much. She would do anything for him. And her writings that I find now reflect that. But one of the things I think that we know is you can't find your way into recovery for somebody else, even for your child. People want to say, just do it for your child. You have to find that for yourself.
Yeah. And so you talked about how she was in and out of treatment and recovery periods. When did she first hit a good stretch of recovery that you can remember, where I'm sure it gave everybody hope? Oh, she's doing great.
We would go through this about every year and a half, that we would have a really good period. It might be, first you have good periods of days, and I always say cautiously optimistic, and then it might turn into a few weeks, and then into a few months. And then you'd notice behaviors coming back, the lack of phone calls, the lack of connection, and you would begin to worry again. I describe it as a parent as living in a way that your foot is like halfway down on the pedal all the time. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the phone calls that you get in the middle of the night. And Summer would experience a lot of paranoia related to her early trauma. And we see this with so many young folks who begin to dabble in some type of substance use. As you mentioned earlier, it's to cover that pain. Yeah. And for her, again, it resulted in paranoia. So I would, at times, get 25 calls in one night. She would think that the person who was her abuser was after her. She would call the police to come help her. She would reach out any way that she could, but then she would continue to use that cycle.
And so when those moments came, when she was doing well, you said, and then you would have those reduction in phone calls, and then the lots of calls at night with the paranoia. What substance was she going back to? Was it all of the above? Was there something that kept just like reaching back to her?
For Summer, it was cocaine. And people often think that heroin is the only thing that we're facing right now, or fentanyl as it's changed to. And one of the messages that I always like to get across is it can be anything. It can be just, and I don't like to use the word just, but alcohol. We lose so many people to different substances. Oh, yeah. And crack cocaine. People don't think of a young white girl in Guilderland, New York, using crack cocaine. And she said to me, Mom, when somebody introduced that to me, I could never, I spent the whole time trying to get that same high again, trying to take the pain away.
Yeah, and it's, like you mentioned, you don't want to say just alcohol, but the reality is everything is still out there, right? We have something that's, maybe grabbing the headlines right now because it is such a major concern at this moment, but that doesn't mean everything else has gone away, and people still have to work through those things. So I know Summer, you said she passed when she was 31.
Yes.
And so I know we talked about one child. She went on to have other children as well.
Yes, she has a total of 3 boys, and they're all doing very, very well. And again, she loved those boys so very much. Right now, the boys are 13, 14, and 22, and just doing amazingly well. I just came back from visiting with my oldest grandson. We took a long, delayed trip to Alaska for his graduation present.
Nice.
And had a lot of time to talk about his mom. He experienced a lot of anger when his mom passed. It's very hard for those children who have parents who they lose or struggle with substance use disorder because you want to think, am I not enough?
Yeah.
Why can't you get this right for me?
And I know it's been about 10 years since she passed now, right?
It's, I woke up this morning before I came here and I was thinking about that, and I can't believe it, but it has been in January 9th, 2025, it will be 10 years since I lost my child.
And so just doing the math here, that would have made her sons at the time 12, 4, and 3, I think.
Yes.
So difficult time, never not a difficult time, but a difficult time in their upbringing and growing up to have to face something like that, certainly.
Very much so, very much so. And unfortunately, we have so many families, not only here in New York State, but across the United States and across the world that are facing the same scenario and putting us in areas where we have kinship care, where grandparents are now raising these young children. So it's a disease that not only takes down the person that is the immediate person, but as we always know, it's a family disease, and unfortunately, it continues.
Yeah. So I want to before we get into what's been happening for most of the last 10 years to remember her and honor her, I want to have us just talk about what happened when she turned 31. What was that final situation that took her from us?
Well, I'd like to mention before we lost her, the previous 3 years were wonderful in the fact that each year things were getting progressively better. So I say 3 years before we lost Summer, she spent that Christmas in jail. 2 years before, she spent the Christmas in a rehab facility where we were able to visit her. Yeah. And then that previous year, and as we headed into this last Christmas that we had, she made what was for her a very hard decision to participate in Schenectady Drug Court. And she said, I want this. I want to get away from this hell of addiction that I'm dealing with. I want to be free. And she knew she could do what she'd always done before and just continue down that path. But she wanted to have her sobriety. She wanted to be a great mom. And so she was trying so hard. And unfortunately, Summer, her insurance company that she was working with, stopped paying for her treatment at that time. And she had not yet been connected to a new treatment provider, so she lost contact with her outpatient groups and the things that were there to support her. And she began experimenting again. And she also made the very difficult decision to reach out to the person who had abused her when she was a young child. And she just wanted to hear, I'm sorry. And the way that the person behaved towards her was horrific. And the way that she coped with that was to pick up alcohol. Oh. And she kind of thought as so many do. I can do this. I can get away with this. I'm going to be okay. And then we do know that she began experimenting with spice, which she was able to get at a bodega.
And spice, for people who don't know, is
synthetic marijuana.
Okay.
It's like potpourri, and every time we think that it's been taken away, I guess it comes in, my understanding, from outside in other countries. They package it as potpourri, things like that, and they change the chemicals in it so it can come into the country, and folks can smoke it and get a high like cannabis. And we believe that she had a relapse, and that we think, again, I'll never know the full details, is that it was laced. There was PCP in Summer's system, which for those who don't know is angel dust, and that is not a drug of choice for Summer. Combined with Robitussin, we believe. She had been very sick, so she had been taking Robitussin, and she was taking excessive amounts.
Wow. All in her system.
All in her system,
passed, yeah.
as well as regular prescription medication. And she passed away in her bed in the women's housing program at Schenectady Y. My gratitude is for the fact that she was in the place that she was cared for, in the place that she lived. She wasn't on the street, as so many were, and that she just fell asleep that night. She just fell asleep.
I just wanted to mention, too, you talked about how the 3 years before you lost Summer, each year was progressively better.
Yeah.
And I think there's a message in that, too, is that, we talk about recovery, and recovery is not a destination. You don't get there and say, hey, I made it, I'm done. It really is an active maintaining of that recovery that you're in, and that the challenges can continue to be very real.
100%. When I tried to, I would say to my daughter, Summer, I can't even put myself in your place. I said, for me, I'll say food is my drug of choice. If something goes wrong in my life, if I have a rough day, today was not the best of days. And so the first thing I did was reach for something to eat. Mm-hmm. And I said, there's not even really a chemical reaction with that. My brain, there is somewhat with things like sugar, but I said, I cannot imagine what it's like to wake up every day and think for just 5 seconds that you're okay. And then all of a sudden, everything comes pouring back in. I cannot even imagine. So I know it was difficult for me, but for her, it had to have been horrific.
Yeah. Well, I want to say seriously sorry and condolences on the loss of Summer. I know it's been 10 years, and I'm sure it never gets easier. But something I know that you've been doing that I'm sure has been helpful to you and certainly her sons and all those who knew her is there's a race. I know there was a point at which she said, I want to do a race, and she did. And as such, you now provide that opportunity, and it's all about addressing stigma in her memory to keep her memory alive, but also to do some good in that memory. Talk to us about this race and how that came about.
Sure. As you said, Summer came to me one day and she said, Mom, she was living in the women's housing program. She was getting involved in some amazing things. It's such a great program here that we have at the Schenectady Y, the women's housing program. She was working with Habitat for Humanity, and they have a group that was coming in called STEM, Strong Through Every Mile. And that group was started by Jennifer Gish, and it's to empower women who are victims of domestic violence or sexual abuse to be empowered by crossing a finish line. So she said, I'm going to do this race. And I'm like, Summer, you've got to be kidding me. I just, I had faith in her, but I was just like shocked. This was not our thing. And she did. And I went to see her, and she did it in honor of her grandmother, who she was extremely close to. It was for arthritis, called the Jingle Bell Run. And I watched her cross that finish line, and it was like a nasty, horrible, horrible day that I didn't even want to be out of the house. Uh-huh. And she never gave up. She didn't stop. And I was so proud. And we were like competitive. We were close in age. I was a very young mom. And so I said, you know what, girl, if you can do this, good old mom's going to do this with you, right? So that was our plan. We were going to run together, and I was going to kind of come in as a volunteer with this group as well and work with those who really didn't run, because that was my thing. And I lost her. Sorry.
I'm sure that's a part of the story that's never easy to tell.
No. Because as a parent, you never give up hope. And I just miss her every day. I miss her every moment. She was a pain in my butt, but I miss her every moment. But I needed to live, and I needed to survive. And I say sometimes that I ran literally and figuratively. And so I knew that I needed to show up, and I thought, well, I'll be a volunteer and I'll show up. And it was the best thing I ever did. So I had this commitment 3 days a week that I needed to go as a volunteer. And I struggled just like I'm supposed to be the one helping them learn to run well, and they all knew Summer. And they lived with her, these women at the Y. And they surrounded me with love and support. And what I have learned in people that are in recovery are amazing. And they get it, and they get you. And in fact, today when I'm done here, I'm being picked up by one of those women that was running. She's still a good friend. She's got so many years in recovery. But I did this 3 days a week, and it took me to a place where I could process my grief. And so they have a goal run that they do when they do this. And so I finished that run, and I'm laughing because I crossed the finish line, and people are like, where did Kristin go? And I'm older now, so I had to run right into the bathroom, right? So they're like, where is she? And when I came back out, I was thinking, this is amazing. This run is for domestic violence that we had done, started by a mom who had lost her child. And I thought, is there anything like this at the time for addiction awareness? And you have to think, this was almost 10 years ago. We weren't having we would not be sitting there having this conversation that you and I are having right now. And I thought, let's do this. And, when you don't know what you're doing, you surround yourself by people who do. You go on a leap and a prayer. Yeah. And Summer's love and her caring nature for other people helped me become a race director. And I still don't love running, but I'm an amazing race director.
And so something you probably never thought you'd be doing.
100%.
But here it is, and something that means so much to you and doing so much good for so many people. It's going into its 9th year, is that right?
Yes.
And it happens in May?
It happens in May. We have it at Guilderland High School, so Summer was a graduate of Guilderland High School, so it's very important to me that we are here in this community. Yep. I think a lot of times people think, although it's definitely changed with the recent epidemic that we're in, that it doesn't happen here. And it does happen here.
And so the actual name of the race is?
It's a long one.
Okay.
It's the Summer Smith 5K Addiction Awareness Memorial Run.
All right, great. So people can look that up. We can certainly post information to it if people want to be involved. When do you recommend people, start getting themselves registered, signed up, all that?
Sure. Usually after the first of the year. So we do have a website you can go to. It's called summersmith5k.com.
Okay.
And you can go there. You can also see Summer's story as well. There's information there. We'll have some events leading up to it. And for those people, we take walkers, we take runners. We encourage people to come in teams. We're going to do a lot of encouragement with that this year. And we are one of the few races that allow animals as well. We're a big animal support type of group. And so you can bring your dogs, your cats, as long as they're well behaved. And, one of the things this is, in addition to being a race, it's a day, we give a lot of scholarships away to those people that are actively in recovery. If somebody's in recovery and they want to come to the run and do not have the money, we will give them a free entry into the race.
That's great.
We go out to several of the houses around here that have people in recovery, some of the young folks, and share Summer's story. And this is a day to celebrate what it's like to be surrounded with your community, have a great time, laugh, and we also honor those that have lost their lives. So we tell a story on the run. On the way out, we have folks who hold signs, and they tell the story. Every other sign is a fact about substance use disorder, and a story that is designed by a family member, and we do that at no charge to the family, that they tell about somebody they've lost. Yep. And then my best friend always holds the sign, but there's hope. And it starts with, 23.5 million people live their lives in recovery, and that is the story. And then we show signs of people who are living their lives, their best lives in recovery. So it's a day to honor, and it's a day to celebrate.
It sounds like it's a great day. It sounds like it's a great race that happens, and the way it's done is just tremendous. And Kristin, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the story of your daughter, talking to us about the race. And I certainly hope that people will take the opportunity to get involved. So great, too, that if somebody doesn't have the means or maybe isn't a runner, they can run, they can walk their dog or cat.
Yes.
Just be involved, be a part of that great moment. Thank you so much, again, for sitting down with us today.
Sure. Thank you.
And thank you for checking out the podcast here today. I'm Jerry Gretzinger, your host again for Addiction, the Next Step, brought to you by the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports. You want to learn more information about what we talked about today or just what we can do to help out, go to oasas.ny.gov, oasas.ny.gov. We'll talk to you soon. Be well.